What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Samsung Galaxy A04s. Now, as the name of the phone suggests, this is the successor to the Samsung Galaxy A03s that came out a little over a year ago. Now, as of the recording of this video, this phone is not officially launched in the US, but just based on past years, I'm sure it eventually will be. Now, as always, if you want to learn more about this phone, be sure to subscribe to the channel. This is, of course, my first impressions video, so as of this recording, I don't really have anything else about this phone, but definitely stay tuned because I will be making plenty of videos about it in the future. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, before we get too much into the phone itself, let's take a look at what comes in the box, and just based on previous Samsungs, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be a whole lot. So we got a quick start guide, then a European wall adapter. So again, this phone is not currently offered by US carriers, so just keep in mind when this phone does eventually make its way to US carriers, some minor specs might be a little different. We also got a USB-C cable, and finally a SIM card removal tool. So again, not really a whole lot in there. No fancy phone cases or weird bells and whistles some other manufacturers have. I was actually even surprised to see a wall adapter in there, but probably when this phone does reach the US, it most likely won't come with a wall adapter, but who knows, maybe it will. But anyway, moving on to the phone itself, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz PLS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in general, this is pretty much the exact display as the A04s, and for that matter, it's basically the same kind of display as every other phone in this price range. On one hand, it's definitely not bad. I mean, at 6.5 inches, it is decently large, so if you're doing stuff like web browsing, social media, things like that, everything will be at least easy to see. And of course, with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something in landscape mode, you're going to get a nicer, more cinematic experience. Things are going to be a bit more immersive. And when you're doing your web browsing, social media, things like that, with a taller form factor like this, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. And then with the 90Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a bit faster and smoother, making the phone feel a bit more premium to use. So overall, the display is definitely not bad. Really, my only complaint here is the 720p resolution, which honestly, for a really entry-level phone like this, it's okay. But if you are going to be consuming a lot of content, doing stuff like videos, playing games, things like that, things where you really want a nice looking image, then you're most likely going to want a 1080p resolution instead. But again, for what it is, I do think we are getting a decent display here. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So definitely, for an entry-level 4G phone, this is a great amount of storage, considering first of all, this phone's predecessor, the Samsung Galaxy A03s, only had 32GB, I'm pretty sure. And I want to say the vast majority of 4G phones in this general price range still only have 32, even in 2023. And at this point in time, that's really just not enough. Even if you're not doing a ton with your phone, I feel like even then, 32GB is going to fill up pretty quickly. So with 64, you're definitely not going to have to worry nearly as much. Now, that being said, keep in mind, again, this phone in my hand is an unlocked international phone, and chances are, when US carriers start offering this phone, there might be a bit less storage. It might only have 32. I mean, I really hope I'm wrong about this, but I have seen several phones in the past where their international versions had tons of storage, but then the US carrier versions ended up having quite a bit less. So all I'm saying is, if you are waiting for this phone to reach US carriers, I personally wouldn't count on it having this much storage. But if you are considering the unlocked version, then again, the Samsung Galaxy A04s that's currently available does actually have 64GB, which in my opinion is definitely a decent amount of storage. Now for security features, this phone does have Face Unlock, as well as a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, so pretty standard for an A-series phone. Definitely nice to see both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock. Maybe like a year ago, lots of lower end phones didn't have both, but luckily at this point in 2023, it seems like pretty much every phone over $100 has both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock, so I am happy about that. But with that being said, let's go ahead and give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive, no issues at all. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 15 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, it's a pretty decent camera setup, but unfortunately there's no ultra wide camera here, which is really too bad. At this point in 2023, pretty much every phone has an ultra wide camera. I mean, I've seen $100 Cricket phones that do. So in general, if you do want an ultra wide camera, if that is a feature that's important to you, even in this price range, you can find one pretty easily. That being said though, at least we are getting a macro camera here. And not only that, but at 50 megapixels, we do also have a really powerful main camera. So if you're taking more regular pictures or maybe using portrait mode, or if you want to get close up detailed images with a macro camera, pretty much anything besides an ultra wide camera, then for what it is, I do think the camera setup we're getting here is pretty good. But again, of course, if you really do want an ultra wide camera, then that is a feature this phone doesn't have, so you will have to go with something else. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. Now I know I've seen this processor before in something else, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE, but in my limited experience so far, this phone is actually a bit faster than that phone, so maybe not. Regardless, when it comes to performance, sure, on one hand, this is definitely not the fastest phone in the world. If you're more of a power user, if you're constantly on your phone doing stuff like social media, especially things like Instagram and TikTok where there's a bit more going on, and then doing stuff like high performance mobile gaming, stuff like that. For that kind of heavy use, this phone is definitely going to feel pretty slow, but for the more basic activities it was meant for, like web browsing, more light social media use, and then maybe streaming the occasional video every now and then, for that kind of activity, I do think that considering this is a really entry level, pretty much Samsung's lowest end phone they have, the performance we're getting here is actually pretty good, and compared to a lot of phones like it, it actually is a bit faster. So if you are looking for a more basic device for more basic activities, and you really don't need a whole lot of power, but you want something that's at least going to be good for stuff like web browsing, then I do think the Samsung Galaxy A04s, at least in my experience so far, will most likely be fast enough for you. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 5. And here are the results I got. So by itself, this may or may not actually mean a whole lot to you. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these. And that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone is going to be a performance upgrade for you. Now, in general, as far as performance upgrades go, it's probably not going to be that much of an upgrade for a lot of people. But again, if you're looking for something really basic, you don't really care that much about performance, and you really just need a phone for more light activities, I do think in that kind of situation, the performance we're getting with the Samsung Galaxy A04s is going to be plenty good enough for you. Now for the battery, the Samsung Galaxy A04s has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15-watt fast charging, so pretty much the standard issue battery for any A-series phone. So definitely a great battery here. At 5000 mAh, you can expect to get really good battery life and longevity, and compared to a lot of phones in this price range, sure, plenty of entry-level phones have 5000 mAh batteries too, but there are still really a lot of them that only have like 4000, and for that matter, there are even much more expensive phones that don't have near as good battery life as this one. So overall, if battery life is really important to you, then I do think this phone will be a good choice. Now when it comes to software, the Samsung Galaxy A04s does have Android 13, which is great to see. So far, I feel like the only phones I've actually seen in person that have Android 13 are Samsung's. So in general, if you do care about having the latest version of Android, and overall the software is really important to you, then pretty much any new Samsung is going to be a great choice for you. And especially seeing Android 13 in such a low-end phone, it definitely is impressive. And considering this is an A-series phone, I'm pretty sure they're getting like 4 years of updates. So in addition to having Android 13, you can also expect this phone to get several major updates in the future. On the other hand though, one kind of disappointing thing about this phone is that unfortunately, the Samsung Galaxy A04s doesn't have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, keep in mind you can't use that feature with this phone. Now that being said, I feel like this is one of those phones that's probably just going to have a ton of different versions, so it is possible the US version might end up having NFC, but honestly I personally wouldn't count on it, so just keep in mind if you really do like to use tap and pay, you are going to want to go with a different phone. Now taking a look at the overall design, this phone has a pretty generic low-end A-series look with a slightly thicker bottom bezel, water drop notch front-facing camera, and looking at the camera module, actually it looks pretty much identical to the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. In fact, actually side by side, these phones look exactly the same except the matte finish on the A13 5G, which I personally like better. The A04s has kind of a glossy finish that does show a lot more fingerprints. You can definitely tell. When it comes to stuff like fingerprints, a matte finish is always going to be better. But yeah, in general, when it comes to the design, is it different than the A03s? Yes, it definitely is. But is it something we've never seen before? Absolutely not. It's almost like they copy and pasted from the A13 5G. So if you are looking for something a little bit more unique and interesting, then you will probably be disappointed here. Again, I personally feel like the A03s looks a lot better. But in general, you're probably going to end up using a case anyway. So at the end of the day, aesthetics really only matter so much. For the materials, except for the glass display, this phone is pretty much made entirely of plastic, which of course is not really a surprise at all. Pretty much every phone in this price range has the same kind of materials. But that being said, for some reason the materials on the A04s feel a little bit cheaper. So despite the build quality being at least decent, the phone doesn't feel like it's gonna fall apart or anything. The quality still doesn't really feel very good, and the phone doesn't really have a whole lot of weight to it either. So if you are looking for something that has more quality materials, then again, just keep in mind, we're not really getting that with the A04s. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Samsung Samsung Galaxy A04s. In general, I feel like for what it is a decent phone, but compared to the vast majority of phones in this price range, including the predecessor, the A03s, it's not really that much different. I feel like the only advantage it has is, first of all, having a really powerful main camera. If you're just taking a lot of pictures and really not using your phone for a whole lot else, then you might be happy with this phone. And again, it also does have Android 13 and a really large battery, so those are all good things. But for the money, I still feel like it's not quite worth it, especially if you're in the US, because in the US, carriers are offering really similar phones for probably pretty much free, whereas unlocked, this phone goes for around $150, $160, which personally, given the options out there, I would definitely not pay for this phone. So at the end of the day, if you're looking for a really basic entry-level phone that has a large battery, a really good camera, and the newest version of Android, then if you can find a good deal on it, then the Samsung Galaxy A04s might actually be worth it for you. But again, especially if you're in the US, keep in mind for the price, even considering the advantages it has, I feel like you can do better. Now, once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, be sure to subscribe to the channel because I will be making several other videos about it in the future. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow A04s Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.